Hello. Hello, friends. And welcome to this stream. Hi. Hello. Hello, Green TNB. So, this should be an interesting stream. Be sure to let me know if my volume is okay. I've put some stuff on my audio track here to make it sound a little bit better. I seem to be a little bit quiet. I've got a compressor on that helps keep me from clipping, but we shall see. Hold on. Let's try. Be up in the gain just a touch. Yeah. 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 All right, cool. Now that's what I call audio. All right. I'll probably bring that gain down a touch, actually. Yeah. Just a touch. Just a scotch. Yeah. All right. Cool. Okay. Yeah, so we're going to read my book, Good Morning, Magpie. I'm not going to say too much about it because I do have an introduction that I wrote. And then after that, I'm going to talk some stuff about this thing that I made. Yeah. So, just today, I wonder. Okay, cool. It does let you see what I'm highlighting. All right, excellent. Just today, whoa, that's really loud. I need to fix that because that freaked me out. Things that one should definitely deal with before going live. Alert box. Okay, follows. Sound volume down. Yeah. Explanations down. That's probably fine. Sure, why not? I guess I could turn down the volume on my headset. I guess that's a thing I could do. Hey, where's my... There we go. All right. Yeah, so Megasopus followed. Thank you so much. All right. So yeah, I just re-released my book again for like the millionth time on itch.io. I guess the URL is at the top of this this window. The book is Pay What You Want. There's also a link below the video, but if you're on mobile, just type in the link that's on the screen. Yeah, it's Pay What You Want, and it's a dark, weird book, but I figured I'd read it because I actually haven't read it in a long time. So we're going to go ahead and investigate this thing. Now, how much of that is on the screen? Okay, I think it should be the whole thing based on what I have. Okay, so this is my introduction. Whoops, uh-oh. All right, okay, starting off strong. Hello. This is an odd book. I've never quite known what to do with it. When people ask what it's about, I struggle with how to respond except to say talking birds and the end of the world. I think that's still the best I've ever been able to come up with. I wrote the first half of this book for a novella contest on a self-publishing website in late 2011, then the rest of the thing with a revised beginning for a novel contest on the same website at the end of 2012. I won $500 and a first-generation iPad between those two contests, the latter of which I'm a little ashamed to say I hawked on eBay for just under $1,000. I was a broke college student, and I already had a laptop. There's so much I could say. So I should just scroll instead. There's so much I could say about how this book came to be, but I think that's better left apocryphal for now. What I will say, looking back from 2019, is that Good Morning Magpie could have been many other things. This is a book written by a 24-year-old creative writing student still very much in the closet about being transgender. She was in the middle of some of the worst trauma of her life and wouldn't recognize it as trauma for many years. After finishing this book, despite having conceptualized myself as a writer my whole life, I mostly stopped writing. I spent the following years examining myself, tearing down my assumptions of who I was, what I wanted my art to be, why I even got out of bed in the morning. I knew something was wrong with me, and it was poisoning everything I tried to make. It took a lot longer to sort out than I could have foreseen back then, but that doesn't really matter anymore, does it? All of which is to say that I've always had regrets about the things this book could have been. The past is nothing but regrets, if that's what we want it to be. And I'm done regretting. I would rather be Sarah than anyone else in the world, flaws and all, and I would rather Good Morning Magpie be the book that it is than anything else, flaws and all. Because really, we're all just hallucinations anyway, right? Someday the dream will end, and we'll just be the nagging memories that disappear over breakfast. Life is too short to be anything other than exactly what you are. So that's what I present to you now. A book that is exactly what it is. A book that was exactly what I needed it to be then and now. I'll now throw down a quick content warning for everyone. This is a book about talking animals in a very violent world that is coming to a very violent end. Many cute critters find their insides on the outside. This is also a book about depression, self-loathing, and suicidal ideation. Not a lot of happy things happen in this world. Worst of all, this is a book about a sarcastic little twerp of a magpie whose sundry neuroses bear no resemblance to my own. This is a fantasy novel, after all, which means nothing in it could possibly be autobiographical. Right? Whether or not you decide to keep going from here, thank you. I hope you are well. Please take care of yourself. Written by me, January 26, 2019. So yeah, that basically says everything that I would want to say, which is appropriate for an introduction, for a prologue. Not a prologue, an introduction. As far as how much I'm going to read, I'm going to try to get through the first part, which is... I mean, there's 4 parts. I think it's a little bit less than a quarter of the total length. But it kind of just depends on how I feel. I feel like the first part does a good job of like hooking you into the story, and the cast of characters kind of gets a lot bigger after that. So I wouldn't want to read that much on my own necessarily. So we're going to give it our best shot. The book is 170 pages. Green TNB. The book is 170 pages. Yeah, it's 4 acts with 3 intermission narratives based on side characters. It's a weird book. It's a very bizarre book. I still don't know how I did it. Or if it's good. My girlfriend insists that it's very good, and a lot of people that I know have told me it's very good, but as an artist, I must be needlessly self-critical to the point of destroying myself. Otherwise, how can I call myself a legitimate artist? Ugh. All right. So we're going to go ahead and jump in. So just follow some other storm. I'll only weigh you down. Quick story. So Murder by Death is one of my favorite bands. And in 2011, 2012. It would have been 2011, I think, maybe 2010. They released an album called Good Morning Magpie. And Murder by Death is a band that was known for concept albums. And they had like very specific narratives. Oh, Bo Oddball is now hosting. Thank you. They had very specific narratives for each of their albums. And then with this one, Adam Turla, the lead singer and writer, like went out into the woods for like 3 months, just living out on his own, and then came back with this album written, and they performed it, and it was a big like stylistic departure for them, and it was the first of their albums that didn't have a unifying concept. And it was also the first of their albums that I actually heard a narrative in. So I just decided to write it. But as I was like working on it and outlining it, it got way too big, because it was about a lot of different like big universe ending things. And so I kind of gave up on the larger, weirder stuff and decided to pare it down to the story that hooked me the most, which was the one that's told in the title song, Good Morning Magpie, which basically tells the story of a dove that is carrying a resentful magpie away from the end of the world towards hopefully something better. And I don't know, the story grew and changed and became a lot of things. And I did actually, way back, I did actually send the finished version of this book to Murder by Death, and I saw them at a live show after I had sent that, like months later. And you know, this was in Oklahoma, and they're from Indiana, so like they don't have a huge audience here. So after the show, I was able to like go up to them pretty easily and talk and be like, "Hey, I wrote a book based on this song, and I sent it to you. Did you get it?" And he was like, "No. If I'd have gotten that, I would love to read it." And I never heard anything after that. So as far as I know, they either got it and threw it away, or Ellie the bicycle is followed. Thank you. She comes. Yes. Tigrex says, I hope it's too much of a bother. Just let me perish. Yup. You're about to get a lot of that, Tigrex. But yeah, as far as I know, they never really, they never read the book. So, maybe someday I'll try to send them another copy. But, yeah. So, hello, Queen Zewestra. Hello, Zewestra. Zoe. All right. So this is the prologue. The blank page. It stares at him like a defiant child. How long has he been thinking about these words, weighing their eventual composition, praying that the final arrangement will lead to a satisfactory conclusion? It will not be perfect. He knows this now, after starting and stopping more times than he can count. There will be regrets. There will be mistakes. It will never be exactly what he wants it to be. But he has spent a great deal of time putting words down to paper, practicing on the smaller tales. For better or worse, the time has come to write the final story. No more plans, no more scales, no more praying. Now is the moment, the only one, and every one after. He dips the nub into his inkwell, drifts over to the page. A single drop of ink splashes in a perfect sphere and sinks into the paper. One final moment of hesitation. Then he writes. Ooh, spooky. What does it mean? Let's see. I thought I had picked out music that I wanted to play, but perhaps I did not. Dang. Where? I need some mood here. Where am I? No. Take me to personal projects, resources, music. Okay, turn this way down, and we'll see where this gets us. Oh, play that. Okay. We'll see how this feels. Alright, Zylestra. That's okay. We'll see how this feels. So far it's got, not the worst energy. Alright. I want to see. Might need to tone it down some, because I don't want it to overpower me. We'll see how that feels. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna start it over because I like where this is going. Part 1. The Dove and the Magpie. 1. Pain. It lit the magpie up like a forest fire, turned his thoughts to ash in waves that spread across his wings and down into his chest. All around him the sounds of pounding earth and screams, but all the magpie could conjure was the desire to stop this driving spike of agony and return to the sky. So he righted himself to the earth and flapped his wings, but the motion caused him to seize over onto his side and cry out. This was worse than anything he had ever known. This was all-consuming terror and hurt that stood 10,000 leagues above every thought save one. He would not live to see another day. How could he? He'd seen stronger creatures than himself, subdued by far less. At the very least, he suspected his wings were shattered, and likely the rest of him as well. With all these eastward fleeing creatures and this fog of confusion, how could he know if he'd been trampled or not? A veil lifted, a passing moment between incongruity and sense, and the magpie took in his surroundings. He lay at the trunk of an old tree, shrouded by a large tuft of grass. The ground shook as deer ran alongside foxes and dogs. Squirrels, cats, possum all begged the birds to carry them away, though most had only heard the sound and seen the panic of everyone else. What were they running from? It seemed like such an obvious question to occur so long after coming back into consciousness, but the magpie struggled still to bring his thoughts and memories back into a shape that seemed familiar, all of them tinged as they were with the red blindness of pain. Something in the west. He'd been flying, and then there was an impossible crash, like 50 spring thunderstorms happening at once, and he fell. But he'd seen something on the horizon. What was it? The magpie closed his eyes and tried to picture it, but... Nearby, a chipmunk trailed behind a fox, asking questions. What was the sound? Why was everyone fleeing? What could there even be to flee from? Despite the fox's silence. When the chipmunk picked up a rock and tossed it at the fox's hindquarters, it spun around and wrapped its jaws around the little thing's head. The chipmunk screamed for only a few moments as the fox whipped the animal side to side until a series of cracks and pops signaled its death. The fox looked up and saw the magpie, bloody and crumpled on the ground. The chipmunk's carcass slipped from its mouth, a trail of red saliva leading down from its chin. Her eyes bored into his as other animals passed them by. Something churned in the magpie's belly. A thought had passed between them, formless, unconscious, but it crystallized in his mind, and he felt tears welling up in his eyes. Rest easy when you die, the fox said, and Aster save you. A crazed yell from his left, gurgling and terrified, sent a wave of animals sprinting his way. The magpie tried again to move, but he had barely regained the capacity to breathe, let alone flee. 3 figures passed by him, all bulging eyes and gaping mouths, before he was struck by a sudden darkness. Already a missed word. Hooray. So yeah, like I said, this is a violent, depressing, dark book. So, heed the warnings. Out of the haze, there was quiet, underscored by screams in the distant east. Every twitch of motion sent lances of brute pain all the way through his chest, blurring all thought into desperate pleas for relief. He drifted in and out of consciousness as the storm cleared away, myriad creatures fleeing eastward about him. Finally, he laid still and tried to push out the ache by concentrating on his predicament. Whatever moment of clarity he'd experienced at seeing the cause of all this din, its effects had vacated him. All he could think of was being eaten by a passing animal capricious enough to take advantage of the easy meal. When he tried to move, his body racked over with 1,000 needle-tip pinches at the slightest motion. He examined his outstretched wings and looked away immediately. A shudder ran through him. The magpie closed his eyes to keep from crying, and soon he fell into a state of delirium. Images of his life flashed before his eyes. The flock, the eyes of red, the hollow tree, and the innumerable days in between. It blurred such that he could not tell the events apart, converging on an image of a lonely bird struck to the side by those more important, more special than he. In a final instant of realization before he gave way to hysteria, the magpie came to understand that he was going to die. Half of him boiled over with terror at the thought, but the other grew to consume this first impulse as a great weight lifted from his shoulders. Perhaps this was all right. Perhaps death was preferable to the alternative. Finally, he said out loud, I can rest. The magpie closed his eyes. But death didn't come to him. He felt a tug, and soon his whole body ached, and he was overwhelmed with vertigo. It's the world collapsing, he thought, attendant to nothing. Soon he'd be dead, and the pain of his broken wings would be relieved. But soon never came, and his discomfort grew as the movement became more vigorous. Leave me be, he called into the sky. Let me die! Shut up, you baby, came a too-sweet voice. He labored his eyes to see. A white dove with muddied feathers had a talon in his wing and pulled him eastward. When the shock of it passed, he kicked his leg into her side and her grip lessened. He pulled away and she turned on him. Do you want to die? If that was not obvious, he said, straightening himself out. When he tried to ruffle his wings, his vision went red in agony and he toppled to the ground. Just leave me be, he moaned. You can't mend my wings any more than you can carry me away from the darkness. Go and save yourself, noble dove. Forget you ever saw me. You can't help but get the feeling that the main character is being misgendered. Oh gosh, there's definitely some egg Sarah in this. There's a lot of egg Sarah in this book. His appeal fallen on deaf ears, the dove grabbed hold of his wing once more and started back to pulling him. You're wasting your energy, dove, he cried, annoyed. I am short for the world, and you will be too if you don't flee with the rest of animal kind. The dove shouted, Shut your blasted beak and help me carry you, or we will both die, because I am not leaving you here. He gave a loud sigh as she continued to pull his dead weight. What is this displaced honor? You're only making my hurt all the worse, and for what little life you may be sparing me, I shall die all the more pained for my broken wings. She dropped him and turned viciously. Should I fashion you a splint for your wings, or shall I simply tie you a noose? The magpie said, Lady, I appreciate your intentions, but you haven't the slightest clue how cruel you're being. I do not wish to meet this end any more than you, but I have accepted my fate for what it is, so leave me be and get on with what life you have left. She leaned forward, looking hard into his eyes. Even if the sky itself crumbled to the ground, I would not turn my back to your need, she said, unblinking. So you can either stay an ass and kill us both, or get off your bloody rump and help me. The magpie eyed her. He glanced out into the forest, where the shadows seemed to be playing themselves much thicker than normal. With a sigh, he bid the dove lead the way, and followed along behind her at a limp. Let's see what's happening here. Sorry. Alright. Oh, I need to check. We've still got plenty of time. Alright. And I may have to run at some point. If a friend of mine calls me. We'll see what happens. The day wore on between exhausted arguments and long periods of silence. Though he asked every dozen feet to be left behind, the dove refused to grant his wish. The thick air and drizzling rain weighed on them both, and soon she grew tired as well. They came to rest by a patch of upturned grass. The magpie attempted to clean his feathers, wincing as he did so, and watched the dove gather bits of twig with her beak. She arranged them in a pyramid and placed a pile of fluffy detritus beneath it. She had disappeared for a little while, and before he could think she'd left him for good, she returned with a thin slab of rock which she set next to the makeshift tower, and she began to strike it with her beak. So this is where this book starts getting a little bit silly already. There's some business happening here. What are you doing? He asked. Sparks flew off the stone and into the fluff. Leaning close, she blew into the pile, sending it ablaze. It's cold, she said, continuing to blow. Colder by the second. The dove nestled herself to the fire and set her eyes on the magpie. He coughed, looking away. You seem awfully resourceful for a bird of peace. Hidden hag has followed. Thank you. She blinked but said nothing. Do you know what happened? He asked. At this, the dove broke her gaze. No, but I saw it. I was flying. Oh, said the magpie. He turned his voice up into the form of a question, the words seeming both obvious and indescribable. She took a deep breath. I'd been traveling with a flock of gulls from the south. We'd just come over the land when we heard what could only have been described as a thunderclap. It looked to me as though the horizon cracked open and a great blackness was seeping out from it. It was dome-shaped, and it seemed to grow larger with every passing second. When the noise came, we fell. Luckily, we were high enough to regain our lift before we hit the ground. Is that what happened to you, Magpie? No, this is... The intention of this book is that they are the bird. They are the animals that we would know them as. They're not, like, physically anthropomorphic. So you are meant to imagine a tiny bird gathering wood and fluff and striking her beak on flint to set fire. Because like the strict like anthro furries thing wouldn't make sense for stuff that happens later. He looked away. No such luck, I fear. A cougar had just taken me into its den, played with me as it would a mouse, and broken my wings. When it heard the crack you describe, it grabbed its cubs and ran. I only barely managed to pull myself out from that hole before it was trampled closed. Of course, I would have been better off if I had stayed below. Assuredly, I'd be dead by now. It's ironic, really, that the world should be coming to an end, and all I want is to die. Yet, somehow, I've found the one creature who cares more for her conscience than her sense of self-preservation. When she made no reply, he coughed again. So, the gulls, then, what happened to them? I don't want to meet this end. He squinted. I'm sorry? That's what you said to me. How can you assume that this is the end to anything? Well, the Magpie said, nodding to the west, one does not normally expect to see such peculiar acts of destruction unless the times are of a decidedly apocalyptic flavor. No, she said. I mean, how can you make that assumption if you were holed up in a den when it started? Excuse me. All you know is that others are fleeing. He stared at her a moment, cocking an eyebrow. Am I under some sort of suspicion? I do believe I'm here at your behest, little dove. I'm just asking a question, she said. Philosopherb. That's very accurate, especially once you get to know her. Well, he harumphed. For your information, I have quite a bit more to go on than just the terrified ambulations of our forest-dwelling kin. I did hear the crack you describe, and I felt something in my heart, even if I wasn't in the air, and it was enough to scare off my predator from a perfectly good meal. And then, of course, the trees. Specifically, their sudden, pronounced lack of color. This does not fit for where we are. It might fit later. Particularly there. Yeah, that's acceptable for now. Specifically, their sudden pronounced lack of color. Not exactly something one sees on a normal summer day, eh, Dove? I never doubted your assessment, Magpie, she said. Simply your reasoning. This Magpie doesn't believe in flightless rights. Oh, geez. Here we go. Yeah. Magpie is ableist. Should I expect you to make such keen inferences on every word I speak? Because if that's the case, I can just as easily keep my silence. She laughed. I doubt that. Do you? The Magpie said. So you've only known me this very short while, yet you've still managed to peg me to a T. Remarkable, that. Even more so that I, normally the first in any conversation to spout off uncomfortable observations, have entirely withheld my judgments of you. Only because I'm female, she said with a smirk. In any case, I never meant to offend you. The silence causes my mind to wander. The Magpie huffed for a few moments, then sighed. Well, I don't suppose I can blame you for that. He paused. His expression softened. There is more to me than how I act, he said. You don't think burbs can smirk? They can in my world, Takerex. Gosh dang it. She looked him in the eye again, same as before. All I can know for sure is how you act, the dove said. He turned his gaze to the ground. I told you you would be better off leaving me behind, he said. I am poor company, Dove. The poorest. She said nothing to this. If I may inquire, he said, you spoke of gulls. You diverted from the question before, and seeing as how you so deftly uprooted me from what few notions of comfort I had left, I should like to see you squirm for a time, if you don't mind. The dove finally looked away. The creatures that came from the shadows took them. The magpie turned his head. Creatures? I never saw any creatures. Had I left you with your suicidal delusions, you'd have dined with them not moments after we met. You're lucky to be alive. Yeah, everybody take your pills. Lucky? You must have a generous definition of the word. If we're together much longer, you'll find I'm not the generous type, she replied. The magpie huffed. Have you ever known a bird to break its wings and fly again? I'm not a bloody ape. I can't just set them back into place and wait a week for nature to work its course. The only thing this body can do well enough to brag about is fly, and I have no chance of ever doing that again. If this is luck, I'd see it wished upon all my enemies. The gods have granted you life, she said. The gods have granted you life. You should be appreciative that they only took your wings. He stared at her for a moment. No, 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 he cried desperately. A religious dove. It could have been anyone, but no, the one creature in all of creation to feel charitable towards this dying bird is a theologian. My dove, I wish she'd revealed this to me sooner. I would have just slit my throat from the start. She seemed more amused than offended. I take it you are no lover of religion. I am not at that. That's your prerogative, then. It's none of my business whether you're eternally devoured by the great worm sloth in your afterlife, so long as it doesn't happen by my accord. She said this with an air of humor, as if in response to a joke the magpie was not aware of. She paused. We've rested long enough. We need to keep moving. The magpie sighed. I apologize for being so rash. I simply have a long history with those who drink from the pond of Asturia. You seem to be an understanding bigot at least, which makes you tolerable. And that reminds me, have you a name? She thought on this a moment. My name has brought me nothing but bad luck, it seems. I'd like to leave it behind with everything else. She gave a sad little laugh. I suppose you should call me Swan. As she patted out the fire, he looked at her with a tilted head. Well, if that's the game we're playing, then my name is Crow Ravenhawk of the Eagle family, thrice descendant of the Penguin clan and second cousin twice removed of... Swan thrapped him across the head with her wing, and he stopped. Come along, Crow, she said with a wry smile. We must be on our way if you're ever to return to your palace. A sense of humor, he said. That's encouraging. Stuffed Crust 69 donated $6 and said, Sarah, I just joined. What's going on? Who are these birds? Also, there's some money because you're awesome and funny. Keep being you. Thank you, Stuffed Crust 69. Excellent name. This is my book. Good morning, Magpie. These birds are sad. It's the end of the world. I'm going to catch up on the chat. Green TNB asked, when do you take your E? When I was still taking pills, I never found a good schedule to take them at. The Phoenix died in holy fire and came back for your sins. I'm on 8 milligrams a day of estradiol. I take 4 milligrams in the morning and then another 4 later in the day. At the same time, I take my second Spiro. So, there you go. Excuse me. Ah, so we're here then. Okay. I've got to find something that is appropriate. This next scene is fucked up. No. Yeah. Whoops. Where am I? The second time they stopped, the rain had begun in earnest. They were losing ground to the darkness, and Swan only agreed to stop when Crow pointed out she was barely breathing. She didn't bother with a fire. They merely sat in the rain and tried to recoup some of their strength. So, Crow said, you said the gulls were eaten, was it? How did you escape that? With great difficulty, she said. He swallowed hard. And the creatures you say came from the darkness. What manner of creatures are they, and why haven't we seen them? Have a good time at work, Zoestra. Thank you for sharing a perfect track for this. So, see you later. Hope you have a good one. Then came a guttural roar from behind, and they instinctively jumped into the air. Though Swan flew up several feet, Crow simply fell to the ground, landing hard on one wing. He let out a cry, and Swan came back down, hooking a talon around one of his feet, dragging him away as he struggled to get his weight off the broken limb. Heavy footfalls approached them, faster and faster. Crow glanced back to see what it was, where it was, but found only vegetation. "What could possibly make that sound?" he yelled. As they passed between the leaves of grass, they heard other noises too. Howls, shouts, cries, a demonic chorus that moved at an unnatural speed. They came upon an upturned root and hid behind it. Whatever followed them stopped, sniffing the air. Satisfied, it pounded off eastward, and other things followed in its wake. Crow could make out shadows, but nothing more. He whispered, "Swan, you were in the air. Did you see what these things are?" She said nothing and put her wing against his beak. The angry ruckus continued, and it grew readily apparent that there was a veritable army passing them by. When the stampede seemed to end, they were left with an awful silence. Even the thundering approach of the darkness had begun to subside. They waited, listening for the sounds of footfalls, but there was nothing, and the frightened cries of those who'd managed to escape had faded into the distance. When it seemed they were truly alone, the birds lifted themselves up and continued onward. The grass had grown brittle and seemed to crumble at the touch. It was as though the land was scorched. The lack of color turned the once bright forest into a dismal gray muck that bore no promise of life in its limbs. It seemed that the spread of the darkness had slowed, but they moved forward at a quick pace anyway, not eager to press their luck. But when they pushed past a bush of crabgrass, they stopped in their tracks. There lay on the ground a rabbit, blood trailing from its mouth, paw twitching. It looked to have been trampled in the initial rush, and now 5 gulls were picking at its entrails. They were jet black, and their wings glistened and dripped. A gull with a tuft of missing feathers at its breast gnawed at an exposed rib. and its beak cracked and fell apart. It proceeded to use the remaining shell to scoop up gore, tilting back its head to let the muck slide down its throat. One gull moved towards the rabbit's head and plucked out an eye. It held the gelatinous sphere in its mouth and stared directly at Swan and Crow. "Does it see us?" Crow whispered. The gull bit down, and the eye popped. Bits of it flew everywhere, and the gull hopped over the corpse towards them. It opened its beak and made a call, and lines of black spittle sprayed outwards from its mouth. Spreading its wings, the same gunk trailing from its side, the gull broke into a run at the two birds. Swan locked up where she stood, and Crow pushed her out of the way, letting the gull run past. It stopped and turned. "What's wrong with you, Gov?" Crow said. "We have to move!" Let's see. Oh, I see what's happening. The gull turned towards Swan and walked at her. She tried to back away from the creature, but its gaze froze her. Just as the gull was about to peck her gut with its fractured beak, the magpie took hold of a stick and struck it across the head, which flew from its shoulders and bounced once off the ground, then collapsed. Its body fell over, bones sticking out from the blackened, rotting growths of its flesh and organs. Swan lay wide-eyed on the ground, and Crow dropped the stick. "How did you do that?" she asked. "Whatever these creatures are, their bodies seem to be astonishingly frail." Quivering, Swan stood up and stared at the decomposing mass on the ground, and the four remaining gulls feasting absent-mindedly on the rabbit. "What's wrong?" he asked. "They were with me," she said, "when the sky cracked. They were of the gulls I traveled with." Crow looked at the small, ravenous flock. "But these things aren't natural." "It's the darkness," she said. "It covered them, and now they're wrong," he finished. She nodded. Without another word, they avoided the other gulls and pushed forward towards the east. The east, now a little less confident in their future. Jabberjay, I have a numerical distance system written in octal and meant to be used by birds if you want to read about a page of notes on the subject. Ah, interesting. Octal numerical. That's fun. Oh. Oof. All right. Oh. Max the Tiger Kitten has followed. Thank you. All right, let's see. What is this next scene? Okay, yeah. Turner. No. 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 Where? Yeah, I figured the your suggestion of octal was based on the number of digits on a bird foot. That makes sense. Night fell once more, and though the rain had stopped, everything was covered in mud. They had encountered no more creatures and labored to keep it that way as Swan periodically flew up to survey their surroundings. When she felt they had reached an isolated place, they stopped. "You wait here," Swan said as she wandered off. She returned again with dry sticks and another piece of flint. "You have quite the nose," he remarked. As she made to start the fire, he held out his wing. I don't feel right letting you do all the work." He struck the flint with his beak, but caused no spark. Instead, he shattered it in two and got his face stuck in the ground. Swan laughed as she pulled him out. Brushing himself off indignantly, he left her to it, instead laying back to stare at the sky. It would be a comfort to see the stars again, but there were only clouds. They were low and flew by quickly. The trees ruffled, but the sound lacked the whisper Crow was used to. The leaves crumbled and drifted to the ground, ashen heaps that went to dust at the slightest provocation. Any other day, Crow would have just flown up above the dismal trees, through the clouds to the night sky, where he would soar in darkness among the stars. Up there, nothing else existed. It was those moments the Magpie loved the most. And distantly, he realized that he would never experience that again. He sighed and sat back up. Looking around, he saw a puddle of murky water nearby. He ambled over to it and took a drink, making to clean the mud from his feathers. He stopped, glaring at the water, then turned up his nose and went back to where Swan struck the flint. "This water tastes of cow vomit. I'll be a very happy magpie when we've reached the east." Swan looked up from the burning pile of tinder. "Ah, so is that where we're going?" He shrugged. "Do you know where better to go? We can't go westward. South leads us to an endless ocean, and north we just hit mountains. Near as I can tell, east is the only real option." He paused. "I do worry about those creatures, though. If that gull nearly had us, can you imagine what a mountain lion might do?" Silence. "Have you a plan?" he asked. She looked at him, and he saw that she was holding back tears. "Any plans I may have had were destroyed the moment we saw those gulls." "So they were dead, or undead. Either way, they weren't the companions you had before. Isn't it Asthurian doctrine to live in the moment?" If you had gone through what I have, she said, "you would not say such a thing." He watched her as she gazed back into the fire. "What have you gone through?" he ventured. She looked at him but did not answer. Crow ventured. Using ventured twice. Good on me. Yes, this is Breath of the Wild music. "How did you learn to start fires?" "A cardinal taught me," she said. He paused, expecting more. Nothing came. "So," Crow said, "have you got any opinion on this darkness?" She shrugged. "Wrath of the gods?" Crow rolled his eyes. "And here I was hoping for some measure of rational discourse. Uh-oh! Facts and logic!" "Crow don't care about your feelings!" "Alright. What do you suggest?" Swan asked. He thought about it, staring into the fire. A ripple of fear coursed through him, and he turned away. "I haven't the nearest clue," he said. "I don't feel any creature can measure the hows and wherefores of something so tremendously malevolent." "Perhaps so," Swan said. They sat in silence again. The magpie nodded off. Swan watched him, noting the strange pattern of black and white lines on his breast. the black circles like comets around his eyes. Asleep, he seemed an entirely different person. There was an air about him she couldn't quite place, something that was only vaguely detectable when he was awake. Asleep, however, it rolled off him like a fog. Crow came to with a start, giving a short scream before falling onto his side. The dove gave him a worried look. "Are you all right?" she asked. He looked around quickly, then settled his eyes on the ground. "I haven't had an easy night of sleep in a very long time." "If I may ask, what haunts you?" He shook his head. "We all have our demons, Swan." She paused, looked to the fire. "Your head hurts from braiding your afro? Well, Duster 367, relax and listen to these birds sadly discuss the end of the world with one another." She paused, looked at the fire. "I think that word has changed its meaning of late." Swan closed her eyes. "I have lived to see all the very few friends I've made be killed." She spoke in a whisper. "The gods are cruel." Crow asked, "Then why do you abide by them?" "Because despite all the horrors I've seen," she said, "I am still alive." An admirable stance. He took a deep breath. "I come from a storied flock, and I left them behind. My guilt is what haunts me. And something more," he thought. He shook the creeping fear from his feathers. The fear had died down, and Crow picked up some sticks with his beak. "Would it comfort you to sleep by my side?" Swan asked. He narrowed his eyes. "Are you making an advance on me? If you're going to act like an infant, fine. Consider my offer rescinded." He shrugged. Apologies. My father was too smart for his own good, and I fear that same wit was bestowed upon me. I haven't the nose for serious situations. If it's wit you wish to call what you have, then I shall not mire your delusions with grounded criticism." They remained silent for a time. Crow set his sticks in the fire, watching them catch and burn up. The licks of flame danced upward, sending bits of glowing ash into the air. He watched them drift and vanish. Crow spoke quietly. "May I lay next to you?" After a few moments of consideration, she nodded. He walked to her and settled by her side. "The world is coming to an end," he said. "So it would seem," Swan replied. He closed his eyes. The dove watched him as he fell into sleep. His form slumped a bit, and then he began to shudder. Swan put a wing around his shoulder and pulled him close. He rested his head on her neck and whispered, "Emma, Emma." The reverence and fear that plagued his voice took her by surprise. Swan whispered, "Sleep, Magpie. Cast your fears to the wind and dream peaceful. Leave your hurt with me." His shuddering soon ceased, and he fell silent. The dove closed her eyes and began to dream. Which part is this? Ah. No. As much as I love the writing music, it's too much. Not quite. No. 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 Well, maybe. That's too short. This makes for excellent content as I'm like searching around for songs. That'll work. Yeah, Breath of the Wild music is very good. Where are we? 14 pages in? Alright. The next morning, Crow awoke alone in the clearing. He gazed bleary-eyed from the scorch marks on the ground to the trails between blades of grass. The sky, it seemed, had grown all the darker. Leaves and branches riddled the ground, leaving only skeletons standing about them. Even these seemed gaunt and sickly compared to winter leaflessness. "Swan," he called out. "Are you there?" There came no reply. "Swan?" he said in a meek tone. He took a heavy breath. "I've been abandoned." "Oi!" Swan shouted from behind. Crow jumped, stumbled, and landed on his wing. "What's your damn problem?" he shouted. "Aren't I in enough pain?" She came ambling out of the thicket, dragging behind her a contraption of sticks and grasses. Oh my god. "Not yet you aren't," she said with a grin. He stared at it for a long moment. What is that? "What is that?" he asked. She set it on the ground and walked towards him. "I had a revelation. As we are, we're losing more ground than we're making. You can't fly with your wings akimbo, and I can't carry you. So we need to fly and can't do it alone. But if we worked together..." He looked at the contraption, then back at the dove. "And what does that have to do with this?" She smiled. "It's a harness. With my wings doing most of the work, yours won't have to do much to keep us aloft. I think if you just keep them stretched..." "I am awestruck," Crow interrupted. I'm sorry," she said. "Does that mean you're impressed?" "It certainly does," he said. "You've been so accomplished at seeming intelligent, I am quite simply shocked that your lunacy hasn't shown its true colors until now. Have you not seen my wings? I cringe but to move them, let alone keep them unfurled. I may just as well try flying by myself." "Is that your threshold, then?" she said. "You're only willing to live if you don't have to suffer for it." "I've already suffered more than my fair share." After a moment, she walked up on him and pushed him. "What do you have against the world that you're so afraid to live in it? You haven't even tried to fly since I found you." "Well, I jumped when the creatures moved past us. But have you tried since? Come now, Crow. What harm is there in hope?" Crow glared at her and stepped forward. He said, "Hope." He opened his wings, cringing, and spread them to their fullest length. Feathers jutted out at every angle, blood matted them together, and in several places bone stuck out of skin. "Have I any hope of flying again? Or should I simply close my eyes and pretend that nature is more a protector than a predator, that she will grant me flight instead of gangrene? He closed his wings, heaving a small sigh of relief, and said, I am hopeless, Swan, because there is no force in this world or any other that could possibly fix me. Rain fell once more. What good does that serve? The dove asked. To be realistic? To be fatalistic? You've broken your wings, so you're as good as dead? The gods of... I care nothing of the gods, he shouted. She eyed him a long while, an argument playing in her eyes she couldn't quite figure out how to articulate. What have they ever done to deserve your scorn? He scowled. What have they done? What have they done? What great good have they set upon this earth that makes the gods so deserving of your adoration? Has there been any moment in your life when you were not in pain? Yet you cry out to them, as though they would ever step from their gilded thrones in the deep halls of Asturia to mend the broken heart of a lowly dove or the wings of a poor suicidal magpie. The very personification of evil seems to be overtaking the world, in case you hadn't noticed. If the gods have any bloody sense at all, they're fleeing eastward to the rest of their congregation. We've been abandoned, Swan, if we were ever cared about at all. He turned his back to her and started towards the west. What are you doing? She called out. I refuse to wait for death a moment longer, he shouted. I'm marching into it with every ounce of strength I have left in my body. He looked over his shoulder. Does that satisfy your silly little convictions? If nothing else, at least I am taking an active role in my demise. Swan grabbed her harness and caught up with Crow, keeping in pace with him. I'm sorry you feel the way you do, she said, but if nothing else, can you think of me? He turned to her. Of you? I would cast you into the blackness itself if it meant I could follow you in. Then, what about Emma? Crow stopped. His eyes grew wide. How do you know of her? He asked. Swan talked fast. Whoever she is this how she would want you to spend your last days? Would you rather see her see you as a coward? If you have any sense of self-preservation, he stated, you'll stop with this immediately. And what if I don't, Magpie? What will you do to me with your broken wings? Peck me until I bleed out? She lifted herself several feet into the air. Come and get me, Crow! He stared for a moment, then turned and continued west. Swan landed and caught up with him. I'm just trying to make a point. Oh, you've made it, he said. You've fashioned it into a sword of absolute clarity. I am exactly as worthless as I've led myself to believe. Congratulations! You've managed to transform my minuscule fears into unfettered certainty. Now please, leave me my last shred of dignity and pretend we never met. Crow, it has been an interesting diversion, little dove, but I've grown tired of it, as I have of you. I understand you hating me, Crow, but hate you? Crow turned and looked at her, shaking his head. That's the work of insurmountable wit, Swan. If you think I'm capable of hating any creature other than myself, you haven't come to know me in the least. Crow, I'm just trying to help you stay alive. He screamed, How many different ways must I express it, little dove? I don't want to stay alive! He marched away from her as the rain grew heavier, but she continued to chase after him. But I want you to, she called. You don't even know me. She grabbed him and forced him to stop. I know you're in a lot of pain, Crow, but the lion's share of it isn't from your wings. For all your tripe about not caring, you saved me from that gull and have kept me in good company for the short time we've been together. You're the only friend I have in the entire world, and it seems as though you've set yourself on the edge of oblivion just to spite me. Surely that must mean something to you. He paused. It isn't spite for you. It may as well be. Every step you take westward is one I will take as well, and even if you drown yourself in that darkness, I won't hesitate to follow you down. No words, no wit, no amount of anger can shake me of my conviction. Our fates are tied, whether you like it or not. He watched her, doing his best to shield his eyes from the rain and wind. And to be honest, I don't want to die, she added. Crow looked east, then west. He sighed. Fine, Crow said. We'll try your damned harness. Very serious conversations. Very moody. No. Of course I'm switching to Homestuck music. No, it wouldn't be that one. Or maybe. No. No. Yeah. That one fits. Corpse Con? What is that? I don't know what that is. I'm gonna Google it. I don't know what that is. And neither does Google. So there's something I'm missing. Okay. After sorting out the tangled mess, I'm actually going to start the song again. After sorting out the tangled mess, she slipped part of it over her head and stepped into 2 loops, one for either leg, and pulled them taut. The slack went into the underbelly of the harness, which Crow slipped inside of as tenderly as possible. As she pulled the various straps into place, Crow asked, Is there... oh gosh. Is there any particular reason I have to be on the bottom? As if I'd ever let you on top of me, she replied. Uh-oh, top-bottom discourse. Before Crow could rebuke, Swan flapped her wings and they lifted off a few inches from the ground. Then they fell, and Swan barely kept herself from brushing Crow's wounds. She let out a hard gasp. By the gods, you're heavy, she said. Rolled his eyes. Perhaps if we got a running start, my girth might not be such an impediment. She nodded and took off into a run. Crow kept his wings in time with hers as best he could, and when she began to flap, the 2 lifted off. She called out to Crow, Spread your wings! He did so with a wince, and immediately they picked up lift. Swan flapped her wings, and the 2 glided upwards. Crow laughed. I can't believe it, he shouted. I didn't think it was going to work either, she yelled. He didn't understand what she said through the rain. What? Nothing! As they flew higher, Crow surveyed the extent of the damage to the world. The land seemed bleached of its color. Only at the edge of the eastern horizon was there even a hint of color and sun, where the storm reached its end. Before they turned their course in that direction, Crow looked back west. There appeared to be a dome of black expanding outwards and upwards. It bled off onto everything it touched and grew slowly across the land. Gods, he muttered. And then they turned east, and he shook his head. Though his wings ached, and there were pins and needles at the slightest bump in the air, he was not in as much pain as he had expected. Perhaps this won't be so bad after all, he thought. All right. that's where we are. Hello, Funeral Tears. It's a Twitch streaming event planned over 3 days for the largest LGBT funeral. Transferring to SFW artists. I hadn't heard about this, but I don't know, if I get an invitation, I might find the time to jump in. I am planning on participating in Marble's 24-hour stream at some point. I'm going to take a quick break, and I'll be right back. Hello. We've returned. I have a cup of Japanese green tea. I'll let that steep for a little bit longer. How is everybody? My 13 friends. I'm not sure what kind. It's basically there's a Asian market that sells tea, and there was it was let's see, Prince of Peace Japanese style green tea. I'm just gonna be a fun person and check Twitter. Let's see. Where's... Yeah. Sure. All right. Hello, Artemis. Okay. Well, green tea NB, it makes sense that you would think that just tea is good because, I mean, it's in the name, isn't it? All right. Let that tea bag dry out. Dry off the bottom of my cup because apparently I spilled some. Tortellini's good. That's true. All right, gotta let that chill. Okay. Now, let's see. Did I get any? Nope. 3 minutes ago. All right. Oh, who goes? Okay. Yeah, for those who weren't here before, content warning for violence and gore and a general bleak attitude. This next scene is actually pretty tame, and I think that I think we're done with the overt ultra violence, I guess, for the time being. So yeah, we're gonna go ahead and let's just make you smaller. Yeah. Make you even smaller. Yeah, there we go. All right. Make sure. Just gotta make sure everything's all arranged as I plan things out. Okay. They traveled a considerable distance now that they had taken to the air, and after their first cautious flight, they had come to understand one thing. They were alone in the sky. It was not unusual to encounter relatively empty skies at dusk or dawn, but even still, there always seemed to be some small messenger bird going off in a hurry. Though they could see flocks of living birds dotting the farthest edge of the horizon, there was nothing else for miles. It chilled them to the bone to see all of the empty trees that were so recently full of life. They needed to rest more frequently now, and because they were traveling eastward, they grew more wary of the creatures that had passed them. They searched for the abandoned homes of other animals, as it seemed the creatures had no interest in nesting. After several stops, they decided to stay for the night in a tree knot that appeared to have been hollowed out years before. They landed on the nearest branch, and Swan began to loosen the straps. It's actually... Oh, Marvin the Magnificent! Hello! It's actually rather obvious, Crow said. We've been hiding in dens and foxholes, but we've yet to hold up in a tree. I'm not so sure we make very accomplished birds. Crow stepped out of the harness, turning to examine the sky. Well, he said, at least we've nearly reached the edge of the storm. Hanging the harness over a nearby branch, Swan continued by him through the knot. She stopped. Crow, come take a look at this. Her voice was breathless. He stepped up beside her and poked his head inside. Oh, what could possibly be so awe-inspiring? The hole did not go back just a few feet as they had expected. Instead, they were met with a great chamber of carved walls and stairs, spiraling upward and downward. Tiny holes were carved through the side of the tree to let in light, and pegs stuck out as perches at various points around the room. We've stumbled across quite the mansion, haven't we? Crow walked into the tree and looked around. Carvings ran across all the walls, and Swan examined the pictographs with interest. Whoever lived here was very important, she said. That was not a very long rest? What do you mean, Artemis? Whoever lived here was very important, she said. There are stories here older than the both of us. The nightingale's song, the simple bear, oh, the fable of the vulture and the wise ones. My stepfather used to tell me this one. Crow shrugged. I hate vultures. I'm going to see if there's any food. He wandered down, hoping for the best. Immediately, he was greeted with a stockpile of seed, the likes of which he hadn't seen since he was a boy. Oh, I was a tired girl. When? When do you mean? Last night? I went to bed pretty early. Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, I've been doing a lot of talking, but I don't know. I wanted to talk some more. It's fun. I don't feel like editing my next video yet, and I was gonna try to rush it to have it out by today. Today is Friday, right? Yeah. I was gonna try to rush it to have it out by today, and there's just no way that's gonna happen, and it's probably better to like give it the time it needs to be finished in its own way. Anyway, let's see. He gaped and immediately started eating. Meanwhile, Swan read the stories on the walls. As she came to the end of them, where it seemed they all converged, she found a symbol that made her gasp. Crow! She shouted. Whoever lived here was a watcher! He spat seeds as he shouted. What? There came a deep yell from above that silenced them both. Who goes there? Show yourself! That's not a great voice for... What does this person sound like? Who goes there? Who goes there? Show yourself! Crow met back up with Swan, and the two looked up timidly. As Swan made to sneak out of the tree, Crow said, Just a pair of small birds! Swan hit him across the head. There came no reply at first, but then in a softer voice, Come upstairs and let me see you. Swan gave Crow a vindictive look, then led him up towards the sound of the voice. They went up the spiral stairs and came into a vast, dark chamber. A bloated owl sat next to a window that looked out above the forest. Crow remarked silently to Swan, I don't know how we didn't see that. She shushed him. I take it you two are seeking refuge from the end of the world, he said. Swan nodded. Only for the night. We're fleeing east with the rest of animal kind. The old owl looked between the two of them. If I may ask, Swan said, why are you still here? He eyed her. These aged wings could no more carry me than a horsefly. Without moving his body, he turned his head towards the window. A dove and a magpie. You know, they say magpies are a bad omen. He paused. How is it that you two came together? I found Crow right after Swan began. We met the way meetings happen at the end of the world, fortuitous, accidental, and entirely without note. The owl stretched out its wing, blocking the light from the window. He examined the bones in this limb with an odd sense of nostalgia. Your wings are broken, Magpie. Have you been carrying him all this way, little dove? I help as much as I can. Oh, wait. I help as much as I can, Crow said. Swan said, We're going eastward, but the ground is overrun by animals and the darkness is consumed. May we stay here for a while? That is certainly a question, the owl said, but not, I imagine, the one you wish to ask. He looked straight at her and did not blink. She struggled to maintain eye contact. The symbol on the wall downstairs. Yes, she asked. Are you a watcher? He looked back at the window and folded up his wing. Tell me, so-called Crow, why is it that even here at the end of the world, you seek to lie to those around you? What are you talking about? And to a complete stranger, no less. He shook his head. Some creatures are irredeemable. You haven't answered my question, Swan said. The owl sighed. The dove seeks to answer every question, he said as though to himself. The magpie seeks to hide every answer. It's quite the confusing couple, theirs. What then is an owl for, if questions are answers and answers are lies? Swan and Crow looked at each other. Perhaps we'll find another tree, Crow said. There are no other trees, the owl said, glancing back at them. They looked out the window. There were hundreds of trees, just as when they had landed. Crow nodded slowly. It's a shame your caretaker left you here in your delirium, sir, Crow said. But we aren't hospice, and we're having a hard enough time keeping ourselves alive. Shall we leave, Swan? She ignored him. What is an owl for, then? He said, The owl is the thought that drives the truth, just as the dove is the truth that fuels the lie. I think this owl is off his perch, Swan. Shut up, Crow, she said. You may not stay the night. You have much to do in so short a time. I would fear for your safety if I were you. Crow blinked. Is that supposed to be a threat? There is no threat in destiny, little magpie. Only promise. You will see that for yourself soon enough. Swan said, But sir, we're very tired. Be damned of our company then, geriatric old fool. Don't be rude, Crow. He turned to her. There's an entire forest of trees out there, Swan. The forest is gone, Magpie, as the rest of the world soon will be. Crow shouted. Then you're blind as well as mad, and we're not taking another word of this manure. I'd have broken your legs for that once, the owl said. You're lucky that age has cooled my temper. The two fell silent. I am not blind, nor am I mad. Though many lived here with me before the end, I have been alone among them for a long while. But that is past, and we are here. He paused. And you have jobs to do. Is that so? Swan whacked him again, and he went silent. The darkness feeds on the strength of life, Soon it will reach the northern lakes, and once it does, it will spread more quickly in all directions. It will slow once it reaches the frozen lands past the lakes, but it will stretch far past the eastern fields before then. How can you know this? Swan asked. Because it is my business to know, little dove. We haven't the time to go into detail. You had plenty of time to wax paradoxical before, Crow said. Swan hushed him again. If you are a watcher, then you must know why all this is happening. If you understand what the purpose of the Watchers is, then the why of the end should be readily apparent. Swan looked deflated. I just hoped. You must travel to the east and warn the field dwellers of the approaching end, he interrupted. It matters little whether they come or stay. They simply should be presented the choice. Then you will travel into the waste and find the home of the Watchers. I'm sorry, Crow said, but we only met you 5 minutes ago. What incentive do we have to do anything you say? Do you enjoy being alive? The owl asked. Sometimes, he said. Then perhaps you can convince the Watchers to turn this end around. Swan said, Are you certain that's possible? I haven't the faintest clue. But what better a pastime is there in the apocalypse? He said. The two looked at each other doubtfully. Swan said, I apologize, but this is all very sudden and rather miraculous. If you were a watcher, shouldn't you want the end to come? The owl showed no interest in answering. Why us? We're hardly the most effectual of messengers. The owl turned towards them fully, extending his other wing to a small wooden charm hung on the wall. I was given that by a blind raven many years ago. She told me that when the end came, I would be visited by 2 wayward souls, and that I would give them direction, and that my doing this would prove the difference between an end and a new beginning. They were silent for a few moments. Crow said, And you haven't been visited by any other wayward birds then, yeah? We're not just the next in a long line of couples you've told this to out of, if you'll excuse me, blind coherence to prophecy? I've told no one before now. Crow nodded. Well then, we'll accept the mission gratefully. Very well, said the owl. Take as much food as you must, and be on your way. Oh, we will, Crow said. Thank you very much for this chance, wise sir. We would have lost ourselves to the winds of helplessness had we not come across this place. Swan eyed him as they bid their farewell and backed out of the chamber. They headed towards where the food was stored, and Swan said, That was awfully easy of you. Easy conversation is the quickest to quit, he said. So you weren't being serious then? Goodness, no. I don't think I've heard such tripe since my great-grandfather fell from a tree and came to believe himself a woman. Whoops! Uh-oh! Egg Sarah rears her transphobia again. Uh-oh! Oh no! Whoopsie-daisy. When my girlfriend read this book, she actually reminded me of that line, and I was like, oh yeah, I gotta fix that. I still haven't done so. Oops, oopsie-daisy, whoa, oh no. God darn it. And it's likely the result of a similarly careless accident. And what's so hard to believe about what he said? Swan asked. The darkness is spreading, and if anyone should know why, it would be a watcher. But he didn't know why, Crow said. He never said that. Not in so many words, but his rounding about of your question showed plainly that he didn't. Even so, no one would lie about being a watcher. No one would risk... Swan, Crow said. You have been out in the same world as I, yes? It's the end out there. What better a time to make fools of the naive than when death is a promise? And what else do we have, Crow? As you said, the world is coming to an end. If we have even the slightest chance of changing that, shouldn't we at least try? In case you missed it, he said, I have very little in the way of faith in my... I have very little in the way of faith in myself or in others. If you insist on taking this errand, fine. I'm certain we'll come across some other animals with a pleasant enough disposition, and you can deposit me with them. I have no interest in dying of thirst in the wastes. Swan shook her head. The depths of your pessimism astound me at every turn. Look at it this way, Swan. East is east, yes? Who knows what could happen when we get there? Okay, I'm going to see. Just gonna scroll ahead and see where we are. Let's see, so we're... So that's at page 21. And part 1 ends at page 29. Okay, that's not too bad. Never seen an egg call itself a crow before? Yeah. So yeah, we've got some mystery here. Got some mystery going. Who are the Watchers? What's up with the religion? What are the things that Crow remembers that he's not talking about? Wow, plot happen. It do. Plot do happen. Wow. Okay, Serena. In that case, before we get back to it, I just want to ask, what's everybody up to? How's everybody doing? How do people feel about my book so far? Is anyone gay? There's not really, unfortunately. So I wrote this book, and immediately after that, I wrote this book. I finished this book in 2012. Following this is when I started to have my social justice awakening, and that's when I started being really concerned about representation and tone and everything. And I actually gender swapped a major character just to, I don't know, satisfy myself. Well, I'm glad you like my narrating voice, Marvin the Magnificent. But yeah, there's nobody that's explicitly gay. There is a pairing that we meet later who are best buddies, best friends, best guy pals. And they are easily readable as gay. They're certainly coded as a gay relationship, but they're also two wildly different species. So I don't know. I'm glad y'all are liking it so far. Yet again, you can download it for free at hmssnowfun.itch.io/gmm. Historians be like, they were best friends. Yeah, it's true. And it's an alright book. It's 170 pages long. things get wildly more complicated as time goes on, as one might imagine. I'm quite proud of it. Although as I said in the introduction, I have regrets about it, but you know, it's an old book. Just avians being real close friends. Well, that's the thing, Artemis, is that these two friends are actually, one of them is a coy wolf, a half coyote, half wolf, and the other is a raccoon. So there you go. I wrote this book in 2012. And I adore those two characters. They're my favorite part of this book, and they're a lot of fun. Enough so that I wanted to write a spin-off book about them for a long time. But there is like a separate chapter in this book that's like one of those characters' stories. Wesley and Everest. We will not be getting to them today. Hello, Serena. Welcome back. Does the raccoon ride around on the coy wolf's back? No. No. That does not happen. You'll have to see what happens for yourself. Wesley would never let that happen. He's too proud. Let's see. Right, music. So we've got some travel that's going to happen, and then we get to the second big set piece. So let's see what we can find for that. Yes, I'm trying to sell you a book you were going to get anyway. I'm selling you on it. Buy it for free. Let's do... Where are you at, Griffin? I'm going to do a supercut of this stuff later on down... There we are. Down the line. No. No. Oh, God. That would be an interesting one for a scene later, actually. I did. Wherefore didn't I link it? Because I linked it on Twitter. Oh, I guess I didn't link it in the announcement. Ugh, okay, fine. There. It's in the Discord now. All right. Get out of here, Discord. It's also linked above the book, and then it's also below the stream if you're on desktop. It's okay, Artemis. You didn't bother me. Okay. Let's just find... At Crow's insistence, they did not leave, as the owl had instructed them. After they ate their fill, they flew until they found another tree with suitable cover. Immediately upon settling there... Oh, you can see my mouse. Immediately upon settling there, the branch leaned and then cracked, and Swan only barely managed to carry Crow back to the ground. He had already been half out of the harness when the limb fell. So it was with all the trees they found. As the darkness had rid the gulls of their solidity, so too had it stolen the strength of the trees. Finally, it came that they were forced to sleep on the ground, with one keeping watch while the other rested. Though it seemed there were no creatures here, they had come too close already to risk it. As Crow slept, Swan gazed across another fire and into the deepening eve. She remembered sunsets on the sea, how every color reflected across the angles of the clouds. Here it seemed darkness only grew darker. It made her yearn for a brighter place and brighter company. The possibility offered them by the owl wouldn't leave her mind. Despite Crow's assurance that it was a fool's errand, she felt compelled. Years of hard living had softened the rebellion of her youth. Perhaps this quest would bring her to redemption. She considered it, until the fire had died down a third time. She gathered some twigs, fed it, and awoke Crow. They switched places, and Swan quickly fell into sleep. Yes, Serena, this is from Griffin McElroy's Adventure Zone soundtrack. And yes, I do have a Discord. There's the link, so that you may join the Discord and participate in the discourse. Gotta stretch my arms. The Discord, yep. Groggy, their progress was slow over the next few days. The farther outward they flew, the more wary they became of the creatures. Neither of them slept enough, and as they came across more examples of the horror unleashed on the world, what little sleep they did get was fraught with nightmares. They found many creatures whose limbs had crumbled and were left limping, or wriggling depending on their nature. They should have been dead, but the darkness kept them alive. Though they had been out on the front lines of the destruction, the absolute reality of what was happening only dawned on them as they witnessed the spread of it like a plague on the land. But as they quickened their pace, the horizon brightened. Color began to dawn on the world once more, and they grew hopeful. The dreary veil of the darkness seemed to lift up as they passed over the last of the creatures. Soon they reached the edge of the forest, and the landscape became hilly and sparse of trees. Despite Crow's reluctance and his pain, Swan pushed them as hard as she could, the owl's words still ringing in her mind. This needs different music. No. Where are you? They had long since left the darkness behind them, and soon they came across other animals. It wasn't until a blue jay flew next to them and gave them a cockeyed, disapproving glance before diving back to the ground that they knew they had reached something close to civilization. As if in confirmation, they passed over a hill and came upon a clearing where it seemed 100 animals were resting, and the group continued back into the trees. "Something about this seems wrong," Swan said. "What? What, that not an animal in sight is fleeing for their lives from the brink of existence collapse?" She was silent for a few moments before saying, "Exactly." Crow blinked. "I'm sorry?" "They're staying put. What reason could they possibly have to think that they're safe?" Crow sighed. "Maybe they've just stopped for the night. Or maybe they appreciate the karmic balance here better than their previous residents. Gods know I wouldn't mind a decent rest and a quick spiritual cleansing after our endeavors. My wings feel as splinters." "That's because they are," Swan said. She moved on. "I don't understand. Don't they realize the darkness is still coming?" Crow didn't answer. He found little in the conversation of interest. They alighted to the ground and worked their way through the crowd of animals, asking why they had stopped moving. The answers given were not heartening. It seemed that some stopped because others had stopped, and when a majority stayed in place, rumors spread that the end had stopped as well. But it also seemed there was something of a beginning to the encampment, as a wounded field mouse explained to them that a rodent called Adam had stepped up as a leader among the animals and spread the idea of safety. When they asked where to find him, the mouse had vanished through the legs of a duck into a crowd of squirrels. As they trekked across the fields of makeshift dens and nests, they became more and more certain that Adam was a myth. Each animal seemed to believe that he was a member of their race, that he had ascended or descended from the very bosom of the sky or core of the earth to unite all creatures in this post-apocalypse utopia. Some said he planned on taking them back west once he visited every animal personally. Others said he was going to magically grant them greater resilience to the cold and take them north to live among the penguins. Many held variously worded contentions that he was the second coming of Aster, that he would lead them to the golden halls of Astoria once they had all been tested. It seemed no two Adams were exactly alike. Were it not for the name of their leader, Crow and Swan could hardly compare the stories from one species to another. They hadn't quite known the damage caused by the darkness. They'd expected animals numbering in the hundreds, but it seemed as though the entire West had fled. Thousands of animals were together, and in a wreck of an ecosystem where naturally occurring extra-species tensions grew even worse. The tales of Adam the Savior, it seemed, were what everyone had latched onto in lieu of actual resolve. When Crow brought up that no one had any concrete reason to believe the end had ended, he was greeted with spite so pure it sometimes turned to physical violence. None of these animals seemed willing to believe that they had stopped for nothing, that it was anything more than group delirium brought on by group hysteria. When they sat down in a relatively secluded area, Crow voiced his confusion. "I don't understand this. So many animals all talking about Adam. How could anyone have accomplished something like that in just 5 days?" Swan didn't have an answer, and they rested, mounted back in the harness, and took off. So the two birds made their way forward, asking for Adam and find little in the way of answers, until they came across a lone, rather nervous parrot sitting atop a tree trunk. Why is there a parrot? This part's weird. He saw them coming and turned away, but when they continued unabated, he began to clean his wings as if to say he was too busy for conversation. Crow said, "Are you about this Adamic dogma as well?" The parrot looked at them, confused. I'm sorry?" "Everyone around here seems to have different theory on Adam, except that he's an absolute blueberry of a leader. You seem to be about the most intelligent animal we've come across in a while. So what's your say in the matter?" He looked from side to side nervously. I don't really have an opinion." "Why is that?" I met him." Crow and Swan both leaned forward. "Oh?" said Crow. "And what was he?" "A hawk," he said. "A hawk with a missing eye." They looked at each other. "And how does a half-blind bird of prey come to lead the animals that would otherwise be his dinner?" "You'd have to ask him that," he said. "Why are you so nervous?" Swan asked. He tried to shrug it off. When they didn't relent on the question, he said, "He has some ideas I don't exactly agree with, and he and his posse made some rather serious threats." "I see," Crow said. "Well, that's something, isn't it? Do you think we'd be able to talk to him then? You could try, but I doubt his friends would let you close enough. He's lodged in a lone tree northeast of here. They bid the parrot best of luck and took off. They'd grown accustomed to the strange looks they got every time they did this, although Crow was focused more on ignoring the pain that racked him and than the undue attention their situation garnered. Oh, you've got a parrot in your lap, Funeral Tears. Neat. What a funny coincidence. Well, I'm glad I didn't brutally kill that parrot. I was actually worried as I was reading that dialogue, like, what happens to this person? Did I do something to this person? I don't remember. Hundreds more passed below them. As they watched the horizon, the tree came into view, and, it seemed, several yards of uncovered grassland around it. The hawk, whatever his guards were, did not let anyone close. When asked, the nearby animals said the tree-bound birds were just a bunch of punks. Crow couldn't help but notice there were no other birds in the area. When the two flew into range of the tree, immediately there came a loud screech. "Swan!" Crow shouted. "We need to land!" Before she could yell back at him, they were jolted out of the air. Crow shouted for Swan to adjust, but it seemed she couldn't, and they hit the ground with a thud. Crow moaned and tried to stand, then felt a pair of talons push his head into the ground and wrap around his neck. His wings pinned under him, Crow struggled for fear of yet another bone breaking. A group of birds landed in front of them, led by a hawk with a scar across an empty eye socket. I wonder... Ha ha ha! Yes! This is the perfect song for Adam. "You must be Adam," Swan said. The hawk walked up to her, his followers in step. They were all large birds. Let's see. I'm probably going to turn this music down a touch. "You know the rules," Adam said. "No bird comes in uninvited into my circle." "So you built that tree then," Crow muttered. "Very nice work. And this grass, it's really..." The grip around his neck closed off his windpipe. He struggled to breathe. "I don't appreciate your poor humor," Adam said. He nodded and the grip around Crow's throat gave away. Crow coughed. Swan said, "We've only just arrived. We were following a tip that you would be here." Adam spat. "Can birds spit?" "I don't think they can." "Impossible. There haven't been any birds out of the forest in 2 weeks." The dove and the magpie looked at each other. Crow looked back at Adam and said, "But the end only started 5 days ago." Adam peered down at them closely, then nodded towards the bird on top of Crow. He removed his foot from the magpie's neck, and Crow slumped to his side, relieved. "What is that thing around you?" Adam asked. "It's a harness," Swan answered. Adam shrieked, "I wasn't asking you!" "What she said," Crow responded. Adam scoffed. "A harness for what?" "My wings are broken." "Show me." Crow stood and made to spread a wing, but the effort nearly caused him to collapse. An eagle bit into the limb and stretched it out, causing the magpie to let out a cry. Though the wounds had scabbed over... Yeah, this is a remix of Susie's theme from Deltarune. Though the wounds had scabbed over, bones still stuck out between thinning feathers. One place close to his body showed the beginnings of mold. Adam examined it. "How did this happen to you?" "I fell," Crow said, "when the end started." Swan tilted her head and looked at Crow. "No," Adam said, "you didn't. If you had, you would be dead by now." "And yet here I am," Crow said. "Look, there's obviously something of a disconnect between us because I know for a fact that we're telling the truth, so maybe you're suffering from a delirium. It's only been 5 days." He looked at the other hawks and saw the expressions on their faces. Birds have such expressive faces, don't they? it has only been 5 days, yes? Swan said, "You can't have been out here for 2 weeks. 2 weeks, Adam said. It's been nearly 5. Over a month? Swan said. But how? You're lying, Crow stated. What reason would I have to lie? Adam said. Crow stood up. Because you're a highfalutin prick, that's why. You sucked up on power and now you take joy from playing with those smaller than you. 5 weeks? Really? Just how daft do you think we are? The eagle pecked at his neck, causing him to bleed. Crow stumbled backwards and looked for his attacker. Crow shouted, You snide bundle of feathers and filth! You'll do what? Your wings don't even work right, the eagle said, laughing. The others joined in. Adam remained silent. I think we should leave, Crow, Swan said. And why is that, Dove? Adam said. Are we starting to scare your timid little heart? I'm not afraid of you or your men, but I can tell that we're not wanted here. It's past that point, Dove. Every bird out here reports to me, and that counts you too. What do you mean, every bird? Swan said. Listen, we're only stopping here for a little while before we continue on our way. We wanted to warn you that the darkness is still coming, and if you stay here, you're going to die. That was a perfect time for that song to end. The hawks looked nervously at Adam, who glared at Swan. He started to laugh, and the others joined in, though none of them looked to get the joke. I've been watching the darkness, bird. Every day I fly up as high as I can to see if it's coming. It hasn't moved in weeks. A cyclops with depth perception, Crow said. It must be a miracle! But we've been fleeing from it for 5 days, and it hasn't stopped moving, Swan shouted. Adam said, Maybe your size has limited your capacity for perception, eh, Dove? Swan shook her head. Fine, say it hasn't moved. Why stop here? What if the darkness does start moving again? If it does, we have enough of a lead on it to move on. But here, we've got food. And what's stopping you from traveling further east? It's a dead wasteland out there, Dove. Nothing but corpses and snakes. You know what else is out there, don't you? The home of the Watchers. Adam eyed her. You think we can march out into the desert and walk up to the Watchers' doorstep? Ask them if maybe they'd stop the end of the world? Swan said, It's worth a try, isn't it? Most of us would die out there. And even if we made it, assuming the Watchers were so moved by our display of stubborn hope as to forego the apocalypse, what would we do then? March back across the wastes to reap the benefits? It's suicide, no matter how you look at it. What other option is there? Here you're just waiting for death. Adam sighed. I don't know who you are, but this conversation tires me. He looked towards the other hawks. Have her disciplined in all the intricacies of our organization. As for the Magpie, Adam said, gesturing towards Crow, kill him. The eagle went to attack him, but Swan put her wings around the Magpie. A hawk pushed her down from behind and severed the harness with its beak. They kicked at Crow, their talons digging out pieces of skin and drawing blood, and Swan pushed against them as hard as she could. She turned to Adam and screamed, Stop this! I have worked far too hard to let a simple magpie berate me. You should consider yourself lucky I don't find you guilty by associate. There came a deep, otherworldly rumble that shook the earth itself. The hawks stopped and turned their heads west. The dome of blackness, before only a speck on the horizon, was now all that they could see. The edges of it had, in fact, already reached into the fields. The land grew black, the air thin, and suddenly the wind was filled with the screams of thousands of animals echoing across the miles. Adam marched to Swan. "You brought this," he shouted. "You're the messengers of death the Raven warned us about." Crow mumbled, "You are an imbecile." Adam turned to attack him, but Swan leapt in the way. She dug her beak into the hawk's neck and twisted as hard as she could. A spurt of blood stained her face and chest, and she grabbed Crow to pull him away as Adam stumbled backwards, a gaping hole where his throat used to be. Most of the other hawks had scattered, and as Adam fell into his side, the rest fled. The ground shook more violently now as the entire animal kingdom stampeded away from the darkness. Swan saw creatures erupting from the great dome, tackling the animals and ripping into their flesh as it encroached on the glens at a horrifying speed. She dragged Crow as best she could, her confusion outweighed by her need to survive. It didn't seem to amount to much, however, as they were quickly passed by other animals that pushed and shoved her away from the now unconscious Crow. A break came in the stampede, and she looked out to find a herd of elk coming her way that would surely trample them both. She jumped onto Crow and latched her claws into his thighs, flying up as hard as she could. To her surprise, they gained lift, and though the strain was immense, it was not dissimilar from the strain she had felt flying with Crow in the harness. She couldn't keep it up for long, she knew, so she pushed as hard as she could, away from the darkness. Almost immediately they were struck by other birds, paying no mind to the slow dove with extra baggage. They nearly knocked Crow from her grip, so she flew higher. She seemed only to find flocks of larger and larger birds, so higher and higher she went, until finally the sky was clear and she could look down safely. An alarming number of the animals had been consumed, so that now only a very small group of them were still untouched, forming a circle at its edge. It became obvious that the darkness simply moved too fast, and soon they would all be swallowed by it. The dome was below them now, and pushed further outwards. Her wings were starting to give out, and she couldn't hold the two of them up any longer. Against her will, she let go of Crow. She watched him drop and immediately folded in her wings and fell after him. The darkness grew closer and closer, and when she reached the Magpie, she put herself under him and folded her wings around his body as best she could. She assumed this was the end and whispered a goodbye to Crow, hoping she would meet him in Asteria. In her mind's eye, she saw the entirety of her life pass before her, and it all felt wrong. Her mother had lied to her. She wasn't anything special at all. Soon she would die with the rest of animal kind. No different, no better. After a sickening fall, there was a hiss, and the world went black. Bye, Funeral Tears. Thank you so much for hanging out. Oh yeah, Serena? Wow. That was dark. You're right. The white dove is now stained in the blood of her enemies. What am I looking for? Yeah, Swan. Swan opened her eyes, surprised to find that she wasn't dead. Tentatively, she surveyed her surroundings. Her jaw dropped. The world had become a rough negative of its previous state. the sky pitch black, and the trees a light gray. The farther west she looked, however, the more disheartening it became. Whatever the origin of this darkness, it was dissolving the natural world into itself, as it seemed to be much smaller on the inside. She looked around to find Crow on his back, taking shallow breaths. Other animals lay writhing, tendrils of darkness growing out of the ground and piercing their wounds. Some creatures broke away from them and struggled outwards from the dome, but most collapsed and were subsequently devoured. The blackness soon eked out from every orifice, soaking back up into the earth until all that was left was a brittle skeleton wrapped in skin and fur. Others, however, broke away in the midst of this process, the strain surely driving them mad with fear. Their very bodies dissolving around them, they struggled out of the darkness, but this happened far too often to be an accident. Swan saw something horrible arranged behind their eyes. This wasn't mere consumption, it was infection. The darkness took absolute hold of some, and only partial hold of others, and the latter it must have turned their minds to its own needs. The reason for it became perfectly, horribly clear. The infected acted as foot soldiers. The wounded made much easier targets. This spectacle seemed to repeat infinitely in all directions. A full-grown buck roared up on its hind legs over the corpse of one of its foals, demonstrating its mighty stature to scare off the attacker. But the tendrils went for its knees, and Swan heard a crunch as they snapped beneath his weight. He collapsed, screaming curses which were silenced when the tendrils forced their way through his mouth. They struggled and shook violently, his stomach expanding. When he started to sweat blackness, his skin changed color with it. Swan turned away. But try as she might, there was no escaping the carnage. The end of the world lay before her. Thank you, my dad touched my pencil, for following. She grabbed hold of Crow and dragged him toward the edge of the dome, holding on to the hope that they could still escape, knowing that they couldn't, but compelled yet to try. She watched the growing tendrils and dodged around them as best she could, crying and screaming as she pulled Crow behind her at a painfully slow pace. And then she felt a tug, and turned back to find one of the tendrils piercing through a wound on Crow's neck. She lunged at it, but before she reached it, something changed. Instead of bulging, it shrunk. Withered, it fell out of the wound. She stared at him a moment, wondering what was different. Then she looked up. At the top of the hill, growing closer as the ground dissolved into itself, was a giant, hollow tree. In the center of it, a fire seemed to be burning. Swan blinked. From behind them there came a gurgling masquerade of a howl, and Swan turned. A wounded dog reared its head and galloped towards them, its eyes wild and horrified. When she looked to her left, the wall of the dome was only a few paces away. Not losing a second, she hooked a claw into Crow and kept running. As the creature made to pounce on her, Swan pushed forward through the darkness and fell. She was blinded. She shielded her eyes from the sun and tried to look around. Desert. She heard the sound of wind on the dunes, mixing with the desperate moans of 100 others all around them. She checked Crow to find him still breathing, and lifted herself into the air cautiously. On the westward horizon, she saw the darkness eating up the glens. It was miles away, and she watched it with horrified fascination. As she looked around, she saw a wide circle of bodies leading off from where she and Crow had landed. She touched down and shook her head. How? Before she could finish her thought, there came a growl from behind her, and she turned to see the blackened dog clenching its teeth, many of them crumbling out of its mouth. It lunged for them, and Swan dove away as it collapsed into the sand. It turned back towards them, foaming at the mouth, but with its legs jutting out of its rib cage, it couldn't move an inch. Swan watched it, terrified, until finally it stopped moving, and she fell over into a fit of tears. She shook, trying to hold down her stomach. Finally, she took a breath. Somewhere in the wastes lay the home of the Watchers. It was a slim chance, but the only one they had. She picked back up with Dragon Crow, as there were no materials to make another harness. So she pushed further into the wasteland. She turned her back to the carnage of the apocalypse and tried to keep it from her thoughts, but moving forward troubled her as well. She'd left behind a great many things in her life, and now as she continued on their long march east, she felt a twinge of fear, knowing that she was finally going home. Whew. Swan is the hero we need. Yep. So that's the end of part 1. Yeah, that was the end of part 1. So between each of the acts, each of the parts, there's a story. So what follows is Adam's story, which is basically just like the origins of that bastard. And I will not be reading that. It's very dark and very violent and just like fucked up. But part 2, the journey home. And I'm not going to read this either. If you want to know, dark, violent, and fucked up, I know, it's so uncharacteristic. Is it me? Yeah. So yeah, if you want to continue this story, just download the book, hmsnofun.itch.io/gmm. The link is also below this Twitch stream, and I mean, you can find it on Twitter. It's all there. Just gotta look for it. I wrote you into my book years before I knew you. Yep, definitely. Oh, you won't like Adam's story, actually. I just realized, because it involves bears and cruelty thereupon. Oh God, I forgot about that. It's all basically meant to set up Adam as an extraordinarily unlikable person. And it's definitely like, I don't know how I feel about Adam's story, because it's like Adam does cruelty to bears, yes. Hello, Spaghetto Depressi, you got here at the end. Temptation has followed. Welcome, thank you. Oh, goodness me. So yeah, what do you all think so far? This is a dark book, yes. A dark book about birds. And it only gets darker. But you hope there's a happy ending. There is a happy ending of a sort. That's what I'll say. I wonder if I have... let me see if I can find... Oh, wait. No, I think it's... Yeah, various... Yeah. No. 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 Okay. Looking for a specific track. There it is. So, this, you want to make, Artemis says, I want to make Kraft mac and cheese, but the people I don't want to interact with are hanging out in the kitchen. This is your tragic backstory. Oof. Yeah, that's frustrating. I hate when that happens. All right, so this is a song that my girlfriend made based on this book. And I can't even read the title because the title is a spoiler. So... Yep. That might as well be that's essentially Crow's theme. And yeah, I was floored when she sent me that. Oh, Artemis, thank you. You didn't have to do that, but I appreciate it. Yeah. So yeah, you can download the book. It's pay what you want. And I've always really wanted to do like a comic version. I feel like this story would fit well as like a comic of some kind, but I just don't have the art skills to make that happen. But yeah. I'm glad y'all like it. I'm glad y'all have enjoyed this reading. There's stuff that happens later that I wish I could read. But yeah, this would make a good visual novel, wouldn't it? I've thought about doing like a Twine version, but a visual novel would definitely work well. I would at least be slightly more manageable on the art side. Okay, well, I'm gonna call the stream there because I got some other stuff that I got to do. I will probably be back. Yeah, just kidnap people to help me make it. Yeah, that sounds ethical. Yeah, I'm gonna be hanging out with Marble on her 24-hour stream, which will be coming up in the nearish future. Tomorrow, my episode of Perfectly Generic Podcast will be coming out, which is the Homestuck podcast, and I hijacked it to talk about Twin Peaks. So all the most inaccessible media fandoms are coming together at once. So, oh, you know what I should do? I should do a raid. I keep forgetting that I can do that. Nobody that I know is streaming right now. It's a shame. Hold on. Hold up. Where's my girl? Let me see. Is this the person playing Catherine right now? Hello, Bard Butch. Yeah, you got here just in time for me to end the stream. Okay. All right, then we'll do that. Let's see. Got to figure out how to do this because I've never done it before. Oh. Let's see what's. All right, y'all. Thank you so much, and I hope you all have an excellent day.
Come on.
Oh, I love Erica. She's